Well, welcome to the Unstuck Church podcast. We are in the final stretch of our series of the 5 most common core issues we see across more than the 750 churches that we've served now. And so far in this series, we've talked about getting clear on how you're actually reaching your mission field, building financial health that lasts, and what it looks like when a church just can't seem to develop a leadership bench. Today, we're wrapping up things with 2 issues that tend to show up together, even though at first glance, they don't really feel related at all. So we're talking today about first engagement steps and also physical capacity, space capacity. So Amy, on the surface, these sound like 2 totally different things, but in real churches, they're way more connected than most leaders realize, right?
Absolutely. You can't grow sustainably if you're not engaging people well, and you can't engage people well if you don't have the space to serve them. And again, these are 2 of the most common barriers we see. And the good news, just like the other challenges in this series, is these have some proven solutions. So you are not the first church to navigate this.
Right. Before we get into today's topic, though, let's stop and say thanks to our podcast sponsor, Planning Center. Planning Center is an all-in-one church management software that's really built to help churches simplify administration so they can actually focus more on people. You can easily track first-time guests. You can schedule volunteers. You can manage check-ins, create event signups, and even accept online giving all in one place. Planning Center really helps you better nurture your community, reduces your stress as a leader, and then keeps everyone on your team engaged. So you can learn more about Planning Center and even start for free at planningcenter.com. Well, let's start this conversation by talking about first steps, kind of those early engagement steps. What we're seeing pretty consistently is that churches are just kind of struggling to create engagement steps that people actually want to engage in, which probably tells us something right there, right? In a lot of cases, what we're offering to people just isn't compelling enough to compete for their time in other areas. So, Amy, are you seeing that too in the churches that you're working with?
Yeah. And this is a subject, Sean, you and me, we talked about this a lot last year. So I'm guessing at least the churches connected with our Unstuck tribe have started to pay more attention to this. But there are still so many churches out there where this is just not on their radar. For a lot of churches, people are showing up on Sundays. So I would guess the churches feel like they're winning, right? To a lead pastor, when the seats are filling up, it feels like their ministry is healthy and it's growing. But so many of these people are not moving beyond that gathering because churches don't have a compelling pathway to move them from new attender to engaged participant. And Sean, I think this is even harder these days because coming out of the pandemic, people's behaviors changed, right? They got much more selective with time. They got much more comfortable with digital or anonymous participation. And of course, there's been a decline in the trust with institutions, including churches, which means it's probably taking people more time to get comfortable with becoming known. But what we know to be true as well is that it's also just not enough for people to simply attend church. That's a win for sure at the beginning, but we know we need to create intentional next steps towards connection and towards spiritual growth. So as church leaders, I think it's easy to assume that discipleship and engagement systems, that they're working, but how many of us actually stop and evaluate if people are moving through them or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what would you encourage churches to do if they want to evaluate their current processes on discipleship and engagement?
Yeah, well, first, just identify and name your current path to engagement at the church. Get clarity. Make sure everyone has the same idea on what steps you are hoping people will take beyond the weekend service. In other words, define your current strategy, map it out. And then, of course, leverage data and assess if those first steps are working. For clarity, I think it's a good exercise to map out the full path of engagement, but the first steps of engagement is really what we're focusing on today. And if your current engagement strategy has things only like groups, serve, give, be a member, you might learn that we're actually missing this first step, and it's a major step. But back to my point, when you evaluate how well your current strategy is working, I think too many churches can kind of rely on their gut, or they don't feel the need to question it if it's working. Healthy churches, they leverage data to access if it's working. And as we say all the time, hope is not a strategy. But I think, Sean, some leaders resist doing this because it's just this feeling of this is how we've always done it. So dig in. That's what we need you to do. Dig in and let the data say what it's going to say. And you might discover that your strategy is working.
Yeah.
And you may discover that your current first step strategy isn't. And
Yeah.
again, you're not alone. A lot of churches are using engagement strategies that worked in 2005, but they don't
Hmm.
work now. And there may be exceptions to that, right? But here's what I see that used to work that isn't working so well now. Connect cards. Connect cards on the
Yes.
back of the seat. Like I just said, this might have worked sub 2005, but people are not quick to want to give you their information these days.
Yeah.
It might be a step in the process where they fill out a Connect card, but it is rarely an effective first step.
Amy, I think there's a lot of fatigue around filling things out, completing
Yes.
surveys, sharing your information. Everyone out there, of course, you mentioned 2005. What's so different now from then is everything's digital.
Mhm.
Everyone wants my feedback on something, wants my
Everyone.
information for something, and very little of those people are actually providing some value for my information. So I
Mhm.
think part of that is just fatigue with sharing information and filling out forms.
Yeah. How about the survey that they say, how did you like it? And you give them a score, and then it
Hmm.
opens up into like a 99 question survey.
Yes,
Don't do that.
not
Uh,
not enjoyable.
Sean, how about starting point, right? When North
Hmm.
Point launched this strategy, I think it was in the late 90s, it had remarkable success. Many churches
Yeah.
saw what they were doing and they started their own version of that. North Point was always so kind to share what they were doing and what was working.
Hmm.
And it was a great first step back then. But today, I am just not seeing many churches get traction on 8-week small groups, as a starting point, or a
Right.
multi-hour long classroom experience, or a multi-week commitment type of thing.
Hmm.
And lastly, the old strategy of having the bulletin lead with become a member, join a group, sign up to serve. Today, those are way too big of steps for people who are new to church and faith.
Amy, I could just envision somebody's listening right now and they may be thinking, well, that is working at my church. The 8-week classroom experience is working at our church. We'd love to hear from you. We would love
Hmm.
to know that. So, Sean at theunstuckgroup.com, SEAN at theunstuckgroup.com. We'd love to hear your story if that is working. But by far, the common theme that we see is those environments aren't working for people anymore. So, Amy, if that old kind of playbook isn't working, what should churches be doing differently from your perspective with their first engagement steps?
Yeah, I think once you map out your current engagement process from new attender to becoming known, and frankly, the remainder bigger steps that come after that, and after
Hmm.
you pull your data on how many people are taking those steps, then the next would be to evaluate the health of each step, right? What is the data telling you? What steps are working? What steps are lagging? And maybe there are some that are thriving. And if they are, try to understand why they're working so well.
Hmm.
Well, once you've taken the shot at evaluating how many people are taking this first step, if you're really happy with the results, I would say just further the conversation to say, why is it working so well? But if the data is telling you that there are not enough people taking that first step, then you know this is an area you need to get better at. So if that is you, and I'm going to share a couple success stories here after I talk through this, but the big headline is reinvent it, run an experiment, right? Get a
Hmm.
team together, brainstorm a long list of new ways you could approach that first step, and then just pick one. Pick one
Yep.
because you'll learn something no matter what you do. Run it for, I would say, 3 to 6 months. Run a
Hmm.
3 to 6 month experiment to see if you can get some traction. And I say that because it takes people a while to take a new, to accept a new behavior. So at our church, they're experimenting in this area now. So as an attender, I've only heard about it for 2 weeks. But the
Mm.
more I hear about it, then the more courage I'm going to get to go and take, if I
Right.
weren't the pastor's wife, go take a first step. And this is exactly, I want to share a couple stories. This is exactly what Sarah Gower and her team did. Sarah is part of our executive pastor cohort. And
Hmm.
I reached out to that group just to hear what experiments they're running. I got many responses back, but here's what Sarah shared. She said they implemented something called First Step. And it's a hosted 10-minute conversation after every service. It should sound familiar because they borrowed the idea from Orchard Church that we talked about so frequently last year, but they made it their own. So a 10-minute hosted conversation after every service. They decided to hold it in their auditorium. And what they're learning is that people they like the feel of staying in that room. They're already warmed
Yeah.
up to that environment. So it's a very safe
Mhm.
space to hang
That's
out a
good.
little bit longer. And then she said having a group of volunteers there to help host is a key to the success in actually moving people to take their next step. So it's not just Sarah or not just a staff member hosting this, but they've got a whole host team that comes to it. And then they will present about a 5 to 7 minute presentation about the church. And then the rest of the time is just volunteers sitting down next to people, making conversations and talking about the next steps they can take. So they offer 3 next steps. They say people can try a group, which is a big step. People can try a
Mhm.
serving team, which is a big step. Or they say, or just come back to church, which is that
Yeah.
doable small step until they get more comfortable.
That's
And then
great.
Sarah said, yeah, for those who select come back to church, then the campus pastor invites them to a 45-minute cup of coffee with the campus pastor,
Mhm.
just to get to know people better. And she said, this part's been really effective in just providing another smaller step for those who aren't ready to jump into a group or serving
I
team.
love that. Yeah.
So in obviously multi-state church. So
Yep.
she said so far attendance at First Step has been a little bit lower than they expected, but they've also been doing the math. And she said if only one person showed up at each service with 24 services across 6 campuses each weekend, then we are connected. Like that's the lowest, they could achieve.
Sure. Yeah.
Then we're connecting 24 people per week into a next step. That's 96 per month, and that's 1,150 per year, which is, again, if that's just the bare minimum, those results would be triple than what they were seeing with their previous New Here event. Okay.
I love that.
So they ran an experiment. They're in the midst of it. They're failing forward and they're learning from it. I also, our good friends at Upward Church in Flat Rock,
Mhm.
North Carolina, Sean, they've been
Yeah.
experimenting with something very similar, and they're seeing 3 times the results in people taking first step. And I
Yeah.
reached out to our friends at the Bayou Church to check in with them. And again, something similar, but I thought this was a great perspective they added. They said they're approaching this, as they approach this first step, they have a new perspective. They said their prior first step used to be more educational, and now their first step is much more relational. So that was the tweak, and hopefully that
That's
maybe
good.
opens some ideas for our listeners. So here's my
Yeah.
encouragement when you're experimenting with the first steps of engagement. And this just comes from the feedback I've been getting around the experiments that churches are running, like the 3 I just shared. First, you want to make this first step as simple and low barrier as possible. You want to remove friction or barriers wherever you can. Like
Mhm.
make it convenient right after the service, right now. Make it
Yeah.
often after every service. Make it short, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Remove objections. Like if you have kids, no worries. We've got them covered where they can stay in
Mhm.
kids' care. And maybe this, underwhelm them, right? Focus on meeting them and sharing just a few key pieces of information. Don't have them
Mhm.
walk away with a bag of information and resources or try to tell them everything about your church in 5 to 10
Right.
minutes. Churches that are doing this well right now, the last thing I'll say, they're leveraging technology to, instead of overwhelming everybody with that information, they're leveraging
Mhm.
technology to drip information about the church through workflows so that people can consume this information on their own. In fact, our friend Jonathan Smith at onechurch.to, I'm picking up on his language. He says, automate the transaction, not the interaction. And
Mhm.
so, and I would
Yep.
just say, here's a carrot, have something that's in it for them. And I will say, crumble cookies still seems to be the winning bribe right now.
Can't
Coffee
disagree with
mugs
that. Yep.
are very 2005. People seem to like immediate gratification these days. I was on a call with one of our cohorts, and all they did was change the treat from whatever it was to crumble cookies, and it doubled overnight. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
one last thing, and I probably assume this, but for all of the steps that you're doing, and in particular this engagement step, do you know who the leader is of the overarching pathway? And if you're a larger church, the owner of this first step experience. Healthy churches, they always have a champion for this engagement process. And this is a great example of if everyone owns it, nobody does. So just make sure someone on your team feels the ownership for this. And by the way, If you're experimenting with things and you're finding success, man, Sean threw his email out there earlier. Share that with us. We'd love to hear, because I love to share what churches are doing so that we can all get better at this together. We can learn from one another.
Yeah, we'd love to hear those from those churches out there who are trying things, learning. We could share those stories, and the more stories we can share with others, the better the Big C Church will be.
Yep.
Now, let's shift to the other challenge in this episode, and that's physical capacity. We've talked about this before, but there's so many churches running into this that it's great to come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Growing churches they're running out of space. So, what's the healthiest way, from your perspective, Amy, to think about this?
Yeah, this just continues again to be one of those headline issues for many growing churches. And if you want to hear a more in-depth conversation on this topic, I would encourage you to go back to episode 421, where you and I, Sean, we shared stories and examples from what churches are currently trying related to capacity and service time challenges. So here's where I want to begin when it comes to capacity issues. Here's how I'd counsel you. First, understand when you will hit your ceilings or lids before you hit them. The key word here is before. If you are a larger church, this is something the executive pastor should be monitoring with the senior leadership team. And it's simply leveraging a tool like Microsoft Excel to track your numbers and project them out so that you know when you're nearing capacity. And Sean, I feel like this is basic. So if you're listening today and you're thinking, duh, then you probably have some secular job history in your past or a business degree, because I work with very smart pastors across North America, smarter than me for sure, who do not know how to do this or they haven't thought of it. So if that's you, it's okay. But identify someone who on your team who just loves a good spreadsheet like me, who can build this out. And the 3 lids that we want you to monitor and project out are auditorium capacity, parking lot capacity, and kids capacity. Hitting any of these lids will put you in a turn-away situation with new people. So, for example, we would say that the red zone is when you pass 80% in your auditorium, right? So you take the number of seats you have and multiply that times 0.8, and that's when you've entered the red zone. It's an 80% capacity rule. It's been around forever. Yes, there are open seats, but probably not space for a family of 4 to sit together.
Yeah.
We would also say your kids' space, 80% capacity is when you hit the red zone. For parking capacity, we would counsel you to take the number of auditorium seats you have, divide that by 1.5, and that's how many parking spots you have or that you need for your service. So figuring out your true capacity can be complicated because these lids are interdependent. And I hate doing podcast math, but here's what I mean. Let's say, just for the sake of easy math, you have 1,000 seats in your auditorium. That means you can grow per your auditorium lid to 800 people before hitting the red zone, and would assume you have adequate parking at about 667 parking spots. But what if you only have 500 parking spots, right? Like you don't have enough parking for 1,000-seat auditorium. That would mean that your parking can only support 750 seats. And that's your true lid. It's not 800 people in the auditorium.
Amy, I think you're redefining pastor math here. And while I love this type of math, I know a lot of pastors who don't love this type of math.
Right. And I'll stop with the math. But if you don't know these numbers, someone on your team needs to start doing the math. Here's why. You need to get ahead of space issues because they are not easy to resolve. They take time. I mean, for instance, you need to know at least 6 months in advance that you're going to need to add another service time. Why? Because you have to make decisions on the new service time with input from kids ministries, facilities, and then other teams that need to pivot, right, to make the new times work. And then you need to build volunteer teams to support that new service time. And you need to build a communications plan that helps people move with you. And honestly, if you have capacity to add service times, just know that's the easiest way to address space issues. But you need a time buffer to get ready for it. So my first response to your question, Sean, what's a healthy way to think about the issue of running out of space? It's get ahead of it. Don't let growth surprise you and put you behind the 8 ball if possible. The second approach, I think, is to be thinking about your longer term growth strategy. Think about that earlier. By doing the math early, you'll know when you have to add a service. And that is, again, comparatively the easiest and most affordable way to accommodate growth. But after that, make an advanced decision about whether your next best option would be, A, expanding the footprint of your current facility, right? Do you have enough land and enough parking around the current facility to eventually make that building bigger someday? Or would you be expanding through launching a new location of your church, right? Those are the kind of the two things. Once you've optimized all your optimal service times, we need a bigger building, we need a bigger boat, or we need to think about a multiplication strategy. And if you launch out of your church, will you be one church in multiple locations, or will you be sending out a pastor in a group from your church to plant a new church? Again, these are all great conversations to have before you start to hit these ceilings. And each of these approaches can be successful in creating more space. But these last three, they don't take months to pull off, they take years
Right.
often. So
Right.
before you run out of room is the time to begin planning for this growth, right? Beyond just where our current growth is, when will you need to add services? And then when will you need to expand your current location, launch a new location of your church, or whatever your growth strategy is? I think, Sean, that can take 3 years to get off the ground. So the key is to strategically plan facility decisions so they can support your continued health and growth and not just solve immediate problems. You want to be thinking longer term. By the way, this is what senior leadership teams should be doing, thinking longer term. What do we need not just today for our capacity issue, but what's our capacity solutions for the next 5 to 10 years?
Yep. That's so important. And it's really critical for leaders to get out of the day-to-day weeds in order to be able to do that. I think that's what's so challenging about the conversation, to have the right time when the right people sit together and look at some real data and get a true sense of at what point do we hit our capacity. Because, Amy, you know this, we have so many churches reaching out to us right now who've already hit that lid. And they're asking about expansion. They're asking about multi-site. And we're saying, you're probably 18 to 24 months from that. And there's nothing worse for a pastor than to be in essentially a turnaway situation because you just don't have the space. So start now, get in front of those. If you're experiencing growth as a church, get in front of those issues today. For churches that are bumping up against those capacity limits right now, Amy, they're already there. How would you coach them?
Yeah, again, episode 421 will give you some very tangible examples if you're facing those barriers now. But so start there, listen to that episode. Second, just keep in mind that before you pull the trigger for a building project like an expansion or a multi-site launch, just make sure you've maximized your current space with additional services. And that's what episode 421 went through so well. First, because it's the most cost-effective way to open space. But second, because a building project will require a significant giving base, and launching a multi-site will require a much larger people base typically. So maxing out service times, maxing out the spaces within your church. There's a lot of creativity out there that we talked about in episode 421. But I'd also say this, if you do need to build or expand, I recommend bringing in expert health. Because we have heard from so many churches that are facing space issues, we're actually hosting a free online event called the Church Building Projects Masterclass, and that's on Thursday, March 5th. I recommend you just go to our website, get signed up for it at theunstuckgroup.com/build.
I think it's going to be a great masterclass, Amy. We're going to spend several hours with outside experts in areas of financing, facility building, and design. So it's going to be very practical. And for anyone who's considering a project now or in the future, I think it'll be really helpful. A lot of great insights for you. So, all right. So this has been really fun to revisit the 5 new core issues that churches are facing. But today is a wrap on this episode and this series. So as we wrap this up, any final thoughts?
Yeah, and on today's episode, I think these two challenges of engagement and capacity, they're actually connected. Like I said at the beginning, you can't grow sustainably if you're not engaging people well, and you can't engage people well if you don't have the space for them. So I'm hoping there's a few nuggets in there to get you out ahead of these things. If you're not in this situation right now, what you have is a gift of time to get ready for it. And then to everyone, just be willing to evaluate honestly and make changes, not only to your first steps of engagement, but to your ministry strategies as a whole. It's important that we're always revisiting what we're doing and seeing if it's producing the results that we want. So hopefully, again, there's a nugget or two in there as to what you can do to increase the engagement and the first steps in your church.
Yep. And if you've been recognizing these challenges in your church throughout this series and you're ready to do something about it, of course, we'd love to help with that. The Unstuck Group, we have a proven process for helping pastors lead unstuck churches that are moving towards health. We've worked with more than 750 churches now to identify their core issues and then develop customized solutions that are unique to them, their church, their community, just like the ones we've been discussing in this series. So you can start a conversation with our team today at theunstuckgroup.com/start. Again, thanks for joining us for the series of the 5 most common core issues that we see in churches right now, whether it's reaching your mission field, improving financial health, developing that leadership bench, creating first steps like we talked about today, or navigating capacity issues. You are not alone. You're not the first church or the only church right now to face these challenges. So we hope that this series has helped you identify where your church might be stuck. Even though you're healthy, you could be stuck somewhere. And then also giving you some practical next steps towards long-term sustainable health. Next week, we're back with a really special episode where we're going to actually take some questions from you, our listeners, and respond to those. So we hope you'll join us again next week.